Friends, apropos of improving the mind, you probably have often heard the question that newspapermen and journalists often ask people, namely, if you were shipwrecked on an island and could have only one book, which one would you choose? The best answer was given by G.K. Chesterton, who said he would like to have Thomas's Practical Guide to Shipbuilding. I heard of a man who had been reading so very much about cigarettes being a conditioning cause of cancer that he gave up reading. John, that was a second late. And there was a college boy who wrote home to his father and said, Dad, I'm going to save you a little money this year. You will not have to buy any more books for me. I've decided to take over last year's courses. One day some horsemen were crossing the desert, and they stopped at an oasis for a drink. And a voice out of nowhere spoke to them and said, fill your pockets with pebbles. Tomorrow you will be sad and glad. They obeyed the voice, and they filled their pockets with pebbles. And the next morning when they awoke, put their hands in their pockets, they found that the pebbles had turned into diamonds and rubies and emeralds of the most precious kind. They were glad, but they were also sad. They were glad that they had turned into jewels. They were sad that they had not taken more. And that's the way it is with education. We're very glad that we've had it. We're sad we didn't get more out of it. Did you know that there is a virtue called studiositas? In other words, studiousness. When we started to prepare this telecast, we went to Thomas Aquinas and read his treatise on studiousness. Now, studiousness, he said, is possible because the human mind is perfectible. In lower creation, there's not much perfection possible. For example, H2O can only take on three forms. It can be water, ice, and steam. Plants have greater variety, greater adaptability to temperature, to seasons, and the like. And animals have still more capacity for perfection due to their ability to move from place to place. Man is the greatest of all. Man, on account of his spiritual capacities of intellect and will, is able to get the whole universe into his own head. He therefore is a kind of a little world, a microcosmos. And due even to grace, he can change his nature. He can cease to be a creature and begin to become even a child of God. Now, studiousness is related, I wonder if you could guess the virtue to which that is related. Temperance. Temperance, because Thomas Aquinas says we have three great passions and urges and inclinations. One is to eat. The other is sex. And the other is for knowing. Everybody's curious, men just as well as women. That's the reason we hate to have secrets kept from us. We were made to know. Now, these three urges can become abnormal. Food can become gluttony, sex can become adultery, and knowing can become pride. Hence the necessity of temperance to prevent us, one, from having too little, and on the other hand, from having too much. If, for example, we have too little, well, then we become lowbrows. Now, a lowbrow, of course, does not develop himself. If we do not develop our muscles begin to atrophy. And there is in us, there is in the universe, not only an evolution, but there's also a law of devolution. That is to say, we can not only go up, but we can also go back. A white fence does not always remain a white fence. Leave it alone and it ceases to be white. It may even become a black fence. Darwin tells the story of a number of pigeons that were brought by a bird fancier to a very high degree of perfection of color. And then he turned them loose on an island, went back and found that in 10 years they had all changed into a dull gray slate color. They had degenerated. So it's possible for the mind to degenerate. It has been established statistically, think of this, that 61% of the adults of the United States during the past year did not read a single book. Do you know how much time the average adult spends on television? He spends 3 hours and 20 minutes a week on TV. These same adults, 50% of these same adults that spend 3 hours and 20 minutes before TV, 50% of them had not read a magazine article during the year. 25% of college students had not read a book the year after graduation. Something wrong with education when it does not inculcate a desire for learning. So just as there can be lowbrows, so over here you can have eyebrows. His learning always exceeds his knowledge. Now, a highbrow's knowledge is generally due to over-specialization, or rather his knowledge tends to over-specialization. He concentrates on just one thing and interprets everything in terms of that one specialty. His knowledge is not universal. I heard of a young man who had finished medicine. He went home to his father, who was a doctor in a small town, took care of all kinds of diseases. And the young son doctor said to his father, he said, "Dad," he said, "you know, we learned in medical school that this is an age of specialization. And he said, you get nowhere today unless you specialize in something, and I've decided to specialize in the nose." And the father said, "Which nostril?" Darwin confessed to the ill effects of specialization. He said, "I've spent my life in one specialty of science," and he said, "I'm very sorry to say now that at the end of my days I've lost all appreciation for poetry and art and good literature, which I enjoyed when I was young and in the university." H.G. Wells once wrote a fantasy on the moon men. He called them the Sealites. And he pictured them all as developing one organ that was in accordance with their specialty. For example, those who just studied music and refused to learn anything else besides music, they were all ears. Glass blowers were nothing but lungs. And chemists had long noses. And scientists were carried around in sedan tubs. They were nothing but globs of intellectual jelly. And one of the ill effects of becoming a highbrow, and this is another mark of him, is he has no use for the common people. That's when knowledge begins to spoil you. When you've lost touch with the common man. Horace, the Roman poet, was that way. He said, I hate the common crowd, and I avoid them." Now these are the two extremes of studiositas. Now let us suppose Suppose now that we concentrate on how to improve the mind by a proper use of the virtue of temperance. There are 3 suggestions. The first suggestion is, in all reading and in all study, taste. Look at everything you read as you might look at a lollipop. Hold it on a stick. See what flavor it has. Maybe it's not worth reading. Just think. We are full of hygiene laws. We have individual cups for drinking and so forth. And we're protected. If anything gets on our cranberries, we'll not eat them. But garbage for the mind? Anything. We'll pour in all the filth that we please. As one publisher said when someone brought him a very good novel, he said, I know, he said, this is a marvelous novel, but this year we're looking for trash. So you taste. Now, there are some things that are, once you taste them, you see, well, they're not worth bothering with. Too much. They're all right as a taste, recreational reading. Take, for example, an exclusive diet of novels and TV. When people just sit glued to a TV drama in which emotions are provoked and evoked, the emotions of love and hate and jealousy and fear and dread and anxiety and so forth. As we turn over the pages of the novel, we become more and more stirred. And as we listen to the Westerner and we see that man with the white hat on, and there are 50,000 bullets are shot through that white hat, all the black hats, they're knocked everywhere, but that white hat never comes off his head. And you become so full of dread that maybe someday that man's going to lose his white hat. What would happen to the world? And what are all these emotions directed against? Fictitious characters. A book. Paper. Why can't you see that after a while our emotions are like the spring on a screen door? Pulled and pulled so often that after a while it loses all of its resiliency. And then later on in life, there come real objects and problems toward which the emotions of love and hate and anger and justice and so forth should be aroused. But they become so jaded, so exhausted, so emasculated by being pulled at artificially that they're no longer aroused. And that is why in the face of social injustices, dishonesties, affecting one industry after another and politics, we remain cold. Our emotional life is gone. That's one of the evil effects of too steady a diet. And students, when they go to colleges, should only taste certain courses. Go in the first day. If the professor does nothing but sit and dictate notes to you, quit the course. Then there are certain courses that are not worth following. Statistics of the year. It'll be useless next year. Some courses on sociology. You could get more out of a book in a hammock in an hour than you can out of a course of that kind in 6 months. Taste them. If you do not like them, throw them aside. Then next, chew. When we get hold of something good, and we masticate it in order to take out of it all the flavor that is there. Now this chewing means that we are not always just looking at the book. We first of all have to put forth considerable effort. There is no such thing as an easy path to knowledge. Do not believe these advertisements learn to speak French in 40 easy hours. Calculus, learned in an afternoon. Learn how to play the piano in 10 easy lessons. Buy an electric organ, sit down, play it at once. Just try it sometime. So we're looking for everything easy. We do not read books. We've got to get hold of a digest. Everything has to be broken up for us. We're not putting forth any effort. The other day when I came into the studio, I found a cover on a book. Fortunately, it was only a cover, but it very well illustrates the flight from effort today in studying. Do you know what it was called? Brain surgery self-taught. So we are not, therefore, always to be looking at the book. We have to get away from it and meditate on it. What I do with my books is when I get a book, I read it through fairly quickly. I underline the important passages. That's chewing out the meat. And then I read it over the second and third time. And then I will make in the back an index of my own, so that when I want to refer to those ideas, I have my own index ready. Now, you cannot do that with borrowed books. Anatole France said that the only books he had in his library were those that were borrowed. Then the third way to improve your mind is to digest certain kinds of books. Now, digest does not mean a summary. When there is such a thing as digestion, there is a flow of the food and nutrient value into flesh, into blood, into bones, and into the brain. When, therefore, we digest books, we learn, as it were, from the inside out, not from the outside in, not from the book in this way. We will read the book, then we close it, and we try to rethink what we have read. The longer we keep our eyes on that book, the less we will get it into our head. Try to give an example of something. You never understand anything until you can give an example. Think of the people who write speeches. Then when they've written a speech, what will they do? They will sit down and learn that speech by heart. Just think, they'll make a living mind, made to the image and likeness of God, subservient to a piece of paper. Why, what's written on that paper can be made better by thinking it over and over again. It's often wondered how I can get up here and talk for a half hour and not use an idiot card or teleprompter. It's really very simple. Just simply get ideas into your head. Now, I brought over tonight, there is the telecast of tonight, right there on that yellow paper. It's written in flesh and blood and inside out. Now, I've got pyramid here. The reason I'm not touching on pyramids and on quiz shows is because I don't have time. But I don't get nervous about it, you see. I remember once asking Cardinal Mercier, when I left the University of Louvain in Belgium, I said, I may have to teach someday. What's the best way to teach? He says, tear up your notes at the end of every year. And I did that for 25 years. You have eyes, and I have eyes. But the light is not in our eyes. The light is outside of us. We have the same eyes at night as we have in the day. We cannot see at night because we lack the additional light of the sun. And so too, for the understanding of many things, we have to appeal to the light that is outside of us, namely the light of God. That is one of the reasons why I have in my house, I've got about 8,000 books. Our house is only 25 feet wide, and so I've got them everywhere. Now, this library here is the simulation of my own study. Well, my desk is here, and books on either side of me, and shelves, and then at the far end is a door, and that door leads to the tabernacle, to the chapel. And I deliberately put my desk here in order that I may get my illumination from the Lord. There's a world of difference between knowledge and wisdom. One can have a lot of knowledge and have no wisdom. You can know without being moral. In order to have wisdom, you have to be good. That's the reason. Never go to a psychiatrist who's divorced or is not leading a good life. He can't give you any wisdom. He can never help you. And so when divine wisdom came down to this earth, who are the people who came to have their minds improved? Two classes: shepherds, wise men. And the wise men found what every student wants, the wisdom of God.
Fulton J.Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees.
He was the son of a farmer who entered the clergy in 1919, and on his way to becoming an archbishop, he wrote more than 60 books and attracted a long list of followers. But most of us will remember Bishop Sheen as a television personality.
In life is worth living. And now, His Excellency, Bishop Fulton J.Sheen.
His most popular series, Life is Worth Living, attracted a weekly audience of up to 30 million and won him an Emmy Award in 1952. His sense of humor was definitely a strong part of his magnetism. Take, for example, this comment about his television ratings.
And we telephoned 1,000 men. And we asked the question, what are you listening to? 994 answered, my wife.
In 1966, Sheen arrived in Rochester to succeed the Reverend James Carney as bishop of the local diocese. Names such as Gordon Howe, Vincent Toffany, and Lieutenant Governor Malcolm Wilson were there to greet him. At his very first local news conference, he talked about his appointment.
I have been responsible for keeping and helping 800 dioceses in the world. Now I will be responsible for one, but I'll be much more responsible.
When asked how he might handle any problems in the local diocese, he responded with a short parable of sorts.
Because it is very much like a third baseman coming to a new club and you say, well, now, how are you going to play the first ball? He will say, well, it all depends upon how it's hit.
Archbishop Fulton J.Sheen will be remembered worldwide, but he will always be the subject of special memories here in Rochester. The local ecumenical movement made progress by his very existence. Because of his international reputation, Catholic and non-Catholic alike claimed him.
Said, oh, Mama, his cape. He lost it. And then the little girl said, I will show you her picture, little Judy. And she said, oh, maybe his mommy is washing it. And then she decided that I had sent it to the cleaners and needed some money, so she sent me $1 to get it out of the cleaners. So I have it back again this week. Before I tell you about the historical Moses, and I can never think of the historical Moses without thinking of this one. A few years ago, I gave the retreat to the Trappist monks in Gethsemane, Kentucky. These men, 205 of them, practically never talk. Their lives are dedicated to penance and prayer. And the first conference was always about 4 o'clock in the morning. And this particular morning, I quoted something that Moses said, and everybody roared. Imagine at 4 o'clock in the morning, Moses being funny. And I said to the abbot afterwards, why did everybody laugh when I said Moses? He said, you'll find out. So later on, I was seeing each of the monks individually. Finally, one came to the door when I opened it, and I said, glory be to heaven, where did you get all this fat? He said, what do you mean fat? Well, I said, how much do you weigh? He said, 180 pounds. Well, I said, you weigh twice as much as all the others in here. And he said, I'm not fat. I lost 80 pounds since I've been in. I said, what's your name? He said, Moses. And I said, how long have you been in? Oh, he says, not very long. He said, I got the name, he said, because of my race and my people. And I said, Moses, are you going to the new Trappist monastery they're going to open in Mepkin, North Carolina? And he said, yes. Now I said, how do you know you're going? Certainly the Father Abbot didn't tell you. You can't talk. How would you know? Well, he said, my laundry number is 134. The other day I was passing the laundry room, and as I passed by, the brother did this. So Moses says, that means I'm going to Mepkin. And I said, Moses, why do you want to go? Well, he said, there's much more merit in going to a new foundation because there are fewer conveniences. And I said, do you want me to ask Father Abbot for permission for you to go so that you may be sure you get there? He said, yes. So I asked Father Abbot, is Moses going to Mepkin? He said, no. Well, I said, will you let him go? He said, all right. If you want him to go, Moses goes. About 6 months later, I got a letter from the Father Abbot of the new foundation, and he said, we made Moses econome in charge of the money. We pray for you every day, but I think unkindly of you 6 times a day because I can't get any money out of Moses, and you're responsible for Moses. Well, that's not the historical Moses, but he wouldn't have the name if it were not for the historical Moses. And when one thinks of Moses, one wonders today, why is it that there are not many great spiritual and moral leaders in the world? Institutions have not failed. Banks, labor unions, educational institutions, governments, finances, these are strong. It's men generally who are weak. But Moses was a strong man in his time. What made him a leader? What makes anyone a leader? 2 things. One, a detachment from the spirit of the world in which one lives and an attachment to some great cause, particularly a cause that favors those who suffer and are downtrodden. And secondly, a summons from God. Now Moses, first of all, had to detach himself from the world. Moses was one of the persecuted Hebrew children. This is about 1,500 years before Christ. The Israelites were in captivity in Egypt, and the mother of Moses left him alongside of the Nile. There he's found with the daughter of Pharaoh. He's educated by the Egyptians. He even becomes mighty in words and deeds, as St. Stephen says. After the Egyptians had lost many battles, Josephus tells us that he defeated the Ethiopians. So he became a lord and a prince among the Egyptians. Now the problem came for him to detach himself from these people and attach himself to his people who were enslaved. A weak man would say, well, I belong to the royalty and to the nobility of Egypt. I'll use my power and my influence and the money that I have in order to aid these people, my own people. Not a great man, not Moses. Let me interrupt it for a moment to speak of how we often aid in philanthropy. We live on the 2nd floor where there's comfort. On the 1st floor, there's poverty. We go down from the 2nd floor down to the 1st floor, relieve the indigents, the need, the poverty, and then come back to the comforts of our 2nd floor. The real leaders go down and they never come back. Once they cross that line, they stay there. And Moses, seeing the suffering of his people, treading the water mills along the Nile, working alongside of fiery furnaces and brick kilns, his heart went out to them, and he identified himself so much with his own people, well, that he committed, yes, an act of violence. And then he retired in isolation and contemplation and solitude where great men are born. Now comes the summons. And the summons is while he's watching his sheep, sees before him a bush. It is a fire, and yet it burns not. It is a flame, but it is not consumed. Fire can be the symbol of divinity, for its light is divine truth, and its heat is divine love. It could be a symbol of divinity, too, because God gives without ever losing anything. And God spoke from the bush to Moses and told him to redeem and to save his people who were in captivity under Pharaoh. And Moses said, "What name shall I tell them sends me?" And God gave a definition of himself. I am who am. In other words, it is my nature to exist. No one else can say that. It's not our nature to be. We began to be, we cease to be. God alone can say, I am who I am. And that was why when God came to earth 7 times, he said of himself, I am the good shepherd, I am the bread of life, I am the vine, and so forth. Moses, receiving the summons, said, but I am poor of speech, and God said, I made the mouth. What shall be a symbol of my power? And God said, what do you have in your hand? It was a shepherd's crook. That will be the symbol of your power. And from that day to this, it seems that God has made his progress in the world by hook and by crook. By the hook of the fisherman and by the crook of the shepherd. I go both by hook and by crook. And so Moses now receives his mission. And this identification that he made with his own people was a preparation and a prefigurement of one who would leave the riches and the glory of heaven for the poverty of earth and identify himself with sinful man and not leave him until he had been rescued from the slavery, not just of the Egyptians, but the slavery of sin. And Pharaoh was unwilling to let the people go. Moses sends them plagues. And then finally comes the 2 symbols that need faith. And Moses is so often praised in the New Testament for his faith. He had to have faith, first of all, in the paschal lamb, and secondly, in the burning bush, or rather, in the fiery serpents. Now comes the paschal lamb. They're showing you the fiery serpents there? No, don't show it. Save it. We get so nervous, in these programs, something goes wrong, we get all excited. Now that comes later. Well, first of all, the paschal lamb. And Moses asked his people to take a lamb, keep it in the house for 4 days, until it became identified with the family. And then they were to slay the lamb and to eat it. It was to be a lamb without blemish and without spot. No bone of its body was to be broken. Its blood was not to be sprinkled inside of a house. It was to be publicly placarded on the front threshold, sprinkled with the blood of the lamb, so that the destroying angel that would destroy the firstborn of all the Egyptians would pass by the house of every Israelite, not just because he heard the language or looked at the costume and the dress, but because he saw the sign of blood. And Moses said, and this lamb shall be a perpetual remembrance. Moses had to have faith in that paschal lamb. What is there in a lamb's blood that will save people from the destroying angel as the firstborn of another nation dies? Nothing. Nothing in itself. Moses knew it. As the Old Testament said, it was not the blood of the lamb, but the Savior to which it pointed. Later on, there would come someone to whom Moses pointed. When he would be seen along the banks of the Jordan, John the Baptist would say, behold the Lamb of God, who taketh away the sins of the world. The redemption from the slavery of Egypt became the symbol of the redemption from sin. And this new lamb, and say the night of the Last Supper, take and eat. Not a bone of his body was to be broken. And on the cross the bones of the two thieves were broken, but not the bone of the Lamb of God. And his blood was to be sprinkled publicly, placarded on the crossroads of the civilization of Jerusalem, Athens, and Rome, on a cross. And that sprinkling of blood was to be a perpetual remembrance. Do this. Continue it. Celebrate the death of the Paschal Lamb. And in the tradition of Moses, for I am a spiritual Semite, I celebrate it. That sacrifice of the Lamb this morning. And Moses had to have faith in something else too. After he led his people out into the desert, 40 years they wandered, partly because of their sins. I want to interrupt here because it comes back into my mind now. When I was a little boy, I heard a riddle. I thought it was the funniest riddle I ever heard. I was only about 8. And it just comes into my mind now. Imagine, 92 years later. And you know what it was? Why didn't the Israelites starve during the 40 years in the desert? And the answer was because of the sandwiches there. Well, you like it too, don't you?
Whispers only we know. You and me in shadows deep. Promises our hearts will keep. Neon lights and city dreams. Dancing lights and silent screams. Holding tight, not letting go. In the night our love will show. Echoes of love, loud and clear. In my heart, you're always near. Feel the beat of our desire. Burning love like endless fire. Waves crash on first light will guide the day. Through the night we found our truth. In the dawn, our love's relentless youth. Echoes of love, loud and clear,